So we did talk about installing the versions and distributions, right? I'm assuming everybody was able to download. At some point in time, you should be able to install it before our next class tomorrow. But for now, we're going to use Anaconda in the cloud. We talked about the major players in the cloud, Amazon and Google. They have their own versions, but we're going to use Anaconda on the cloud because I'll also encourage you to download Anaconda locally, regardless of which system you have. Now that we've gotten that big boy, the CPython or the Anaconda Python installed, we want to be able to code and run and execute some programs. How does that happen? You can code line by line using an interactive console. Let me go back again a little bit to talk about some hardware and software. So in computer science, or in computers, we know it's made up of hardware and software. The hardware is what we need. Think about that CPU, that memory, and also here, let me actually try to draw a picture of that here. So we have the hardware. I should clean this up. You have your hardware, which is in the center of everything. Your CPU, the memory, and so on and so forth, input-output devices. And you have your software, which is what interacts with the hardware, regardless of Microsoft software, Google software, whichever software. Between the hardware and the software, you have your operating system, okay? So your operating system is what resides between your software and your hardware. In the operating system, which is Linux, Microsoft, or Mac operating system, you have what's known as the shell and the kernel. I don't know, does anybody in here speak Pidgin English? Okay, so anybody here knows about palm trees? And the palm trees usually have something that is known in Pidgin as banga. Maybe so. So you have kernel, right? The kernel has a shell, and inside you have that wonderful stuff that is what is used to make the palm oil. So think about that in the same light. Even though you have to eat that juicy banga that is used to make banga soup, right? That is the part that is the software. Inside is where the hardware is. Your kernel is what is inside, and your shell is what covers it, just like an eggshell. An eggshell is there's egg whites and there's egg yolk. So that's a relationship between software, hardware, and your operating system. Your operating system has that shell and the kernel that interacts between the software, which is what is the code, and what you have in here as well. You see that Python has a shell, okay? The Python shell is what we use to write the command directly to go to our let's see, do I want to go back or not? That goes directly to our memory, and then the memory sends it to the CPU. So that shell interacts directly with the hardware rather than going to a graphical user interface. So GUI, graphical user interface, is a point, drag, click, and drop, and so on. But then you also have CLI, which is command line interface. Command line interface is the shell. So Python shell, Python console, Python terminal, which is a terminal that you see here that I opened up, that we were using to write Python, okay? So this terminal, which I'll show you that later on, is what you can use to write your Python code line by line, just like the notebook, which you're going to see when we get on here. Obviously, I can open it now because I have let me change that pointer. Okay, so in here as well, when we go ahead and create a notebook, you can open up a new notebook. This is where you'll be writing your code line by line. Very similar. In here, if you want to get into Python environment per se, all I have to do is type Python 3, enter, and you would see that my cursor has changed now from this tilde to have these 3 arrows. These 3 arrows are showing me that now I am in the Python environment. As you can see in here, I'm using Python that, which is a default as of that day. And if I need to get help, I should type help. If I need copyright and all what, I should write that. It's using a Darwin, or it's using a CLang. That's the distribution information, the version of that distribution on Darwin, which is what it's using. But from here, in this point in time, I am in the Python console, okay, which is a default, okay? So it's interactive. So that's one way you can work with Python, going directly to the console, and use that notebook to also get to it, all right? That's when you're writing line by line. In there, we can start writing our Python code just like that. Very simple. And most of the time, you're not going to need to do that because you want Python to help you to do something reusable. So instead of writing each line after the other, you can write 20 lines, 30 lines, 50, 100, 1 million lines. and save it in a file. In that case, you can save it in a file, which is a script, right? That file will be like a script. Think about a movie. When you're going to act a movie or somebody wants to act a movie, they have to give them a script. When it's their part, they just read their part. When it's their part, they read it. That's why you have it as a script, rather than having just one-liners. So somebody who is just featuring in the movie is just going to have one line. The person that's the main actor is going to have a script that they have to go through, things that they need to do. Again, think about if you have a child that you have to tell them to go to school every day. You cannot just tell them go to school every day. You have to wake up and say, hey, get up from bed, make up your bed, brush your teeth, take a shower, wash the dishes, make breakfast, eat, go and catch the bus, go to school, and so on. So all of those are instructions that you give in order for the child to go to school. Think about it. So you can write all those instructions and save it in a file that says go to school. When you want to run or execute that code, you can just say now that go to school, and then the child gets up and does all those things sequentially and goes to school. Okay, just like if you're a database administrator or an administrator for systems at work, you probably know that if you have a new employee, you have to do certain steps. You can write all of those in a Python script, and then you know, okay, new employee, add them to this database, give them this access, add them to this distribution list, do this to them, install this on their software, on their hardware, and so on and so forth. All you have to do then is just have a script for adding new employee, have a script for changing new employee from team A to team B, have another script for deleting employee if they decide to leave the company, and so on and so forth. So that's why Python is very useful, very powerful, not only for employee. If you want to process data and you know that you're going to be pulling data from one location to another, you can write it out in a script. Each time that has to be redone, every week, every month, every day, you just go ahead and run your script. Everything goes on. You go about doing your business, drinking your beer, your script is running, everything is fine. Does that make sense? What questions do we have? Okay, so again, that's how you can write your code line by line. Before I want to go into that, I really wanted to, you hear things like text editor, IDE. A text editor, when I started coding, all we used was Notepad. We didn't have all this fancy stuff. So it's like your grandparents tell you when we went to school, all we were using was counting sticks. Now children I don't even know if children have counting sticks anymore. You know, everybody wants to be on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and so on. Okay, but that's how things were done in the past. You have a text editor, black and white. You type in your code. If you make a mistake, you have to figure it out. I might think I had it tough, but think about those people that had a whole wall made up of a CPU that's made up in a whole wall. There they have punch cards back in the days when NASA just started inventing computers. You have a punch card with instructions. You go and stand in a line. You go and put in your punch card. It executes. If there's a mistake, you have 24 hours to go around and wait again for that instruction to execute. So everything again is getting faster, better, easier, and so on. So that's why before we were using text editors. Now most of the time people use IDEs. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. Okay, integrated. I cannot spell. Integrated Development Environment, because it does not only include the editor, you use the editor to write, but you can also have things like code completion that help you out. You can also have things like underlining, suggestions, and so on and so forth, color coding all your code so that it's easy for you to debug your code, to see mistakes and fix them, and so on and so forth. So that is what we have in terms of executing, writing our code. You can write it directly in your IDE, or you can write it, or let's not just say IDE, you can write it directly in your code editor, your text editor, your IDE, or in your shell. Or you can write it and save it in a script and then execute it. There are different ways you can execute it as well. Okay, awesome. So if everybody succeeded in logging into Anaconda, then we can start playing around with it. But before we start playing around with it, I would like to show you what it looks like if you're writing the code in the terminal. Okay, if you have it in Windows or Windows or Mac or in Linux, once you type in Python 3 or Python, it takes you to the Python shell. In the Python shell, you can write any command, maybe 2 plus 7. 2 plus 7, and you press enter, it goes back and executes it and gives you the answer. Okay, maybe you want to find 5 multiplied by 30. 5 multiplied by 30 will give you the answer 150. All of that is being executed in Python. Okay, maybe you also want it to print out something for you. If I want to say print I'll have to use a print function, which we'll talk about eventually. A function always has parentheses, opening and closing parentheses. In your parentheses, you have parameters. What is it that I want to print? If it's a word, I have to put it in quotes. So since it's a word, yes.
The one you're using is the one in the cloud, right? Not the one that was downloaded.
Okay, this one I'm using is the one that is built into Mac operating system. So I'm starting with this, but I'm going to jump into the cloud and type in these same instructions in there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So it's okay for us to use, but the one in the cloud for now, right?
Yes, use the one in the cloud for now. I'm definitely going to do them side by side so that you can see. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's put it side by side here so you can see. I've written that instruction, or not, well, it's an instruction. I've written the first two instructions. 2 plus 7, 3 times 30. I can go ahead and do that in the cloud as well. 2 plus 7. If I need to execute this, I need to press the play button. Okay, so press play. It gives me my answer is 9. Let's go ahead and make this bigger. And reduce the size of that. And 5 multiplied by 30 gives me, oops, not enter. Okay, gives me 150, just like here. Now I can go ahead and say I want to print something out. To print it out, let's say I want to say hello, ZK. Since I have this in quotes, it's going to treat it as a string. We'll talk about those later on. So if I press enter, you see it prints out hello DK. Awesome. So Aaron, you're using Visual Studio as your code editor. I would like to start using Visual Studio tomorrow because I wanted us to get comfortable with this, but you can continue with it. If you succeeded in getting Anaconda on the cloud, that would be great. Because the next slide, we're going to talk about Visual Studio a little bit and those other ones as well. Very good question, Aaron. Awesome. So I've written that print statement on here. I can go ahead and write the same print statement in Anaconda. Again, print. You can see I'm writing in Anaconda. You can see those colors are different. But if I write it in my Mac, the colors look really boring. You can't even see the difference. But here you can see plus has a purple sign, a purple color. Multiplication has a purple color. And the color differences actually help you to be able to have readability. That's the word I want to say. So let's go ahead and say hello. And this time around, let's try Vitus. And if I execute that, it prints out just that. Okay. So those are 3 Python instructions that I've given. Normally, you wouldn't want to be giving instructions one line after another, as we said. Normally, you want to write all your instructions and save them in a file. And that file would be having an extension of .py, which stands for Python, obviously. If you look at what we have here, this is the file that I'm working on right now. It has an extension of .ipynb, which is Interactive Python Notebook or IPython Notebook. So it's definitely not an IPython file. Here I cannot save it. But in Visual Studio Code, which Aaron is using, he can save his file as a Python extension. So I do not want to go into that, but I'll go into that shortly. Okay. So what questions we have with a few things like Python shell? Everybody has an understanding of that. At least if you forget everything today, you remember banga, right? And your notebook, which we've seen a Python notebook, a Jupyter notebook in that case. And the difference between writing your code line by line and in a script, using the terminal, using a text editor, using an IDE. Right after that, we had break time earlier, but let's continue.